Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from NASCAR.info, and welcome to a very special Monday edition of Behind the Wall, coming at you just after the conclusion of the Worth 400 at Dover. Hopefully our audio issues from last week at Talladega are worked out. I do apologize for the issues we had on that because we have no shortage of stuff to talk about on this week's show. And first and foremost, a big congratulations to the Truex family as Ryan Truex scores his first Xfinity Series victory on Saturday, and now Martin Truex Jr. ends a more than 50-race winless streak, not including his win at the Clash earlier this year from points-paying races, finally breaks through at his home track, site of his first Cup Series win back in 2007, which also was on a Monday and was also with Bass Pro Shops as his sponsor back when he was driving for DEI. So no shortage of storylines already to talk about here. Those of you who weren't able to watch this show live, we definitely want to get this on after the race to get the fresh reactions here. And then those of you who are able to tune in a bit later in the day, we'll certainly jump into all of the action from that as well. So again, pretty good race. I really got to say, very competitive, a much more old school Dover race. We've seen races where it would have like a kind of a bizarre incident at the beginning in the opening laps and then have a long green flag runs at the end. A lot of pit strategy came into play. It was very good to see. And we saw, a lot of comers and goers. William Byron seemed to have the hot hand for a lot of this, and then Truex got himself up there. Ross Chastain was very much in the middle of it. Got to say, right off the bat, very impressed. I just listened to Ross Chastain's interview before starting the show here today. Kudos to him for mentioning Rick Ware Racing and that incident that he had with Brennan Poole, and that he felt bad about that. This is something that's overlooked, I think, a lot with Chastain, is the fact that he has that small team background, having driven for the likes of Johnny Davis and other programs, working his way up. Certainly Trackhouse is now one of the, the real dominant teams in the sport these days. But that has absolutely not been his background for most of his career. And it was good to hear that there at the same time. Very similar to what we heard from Denny Hamlin after the incident with Yaley back at Richmond a few weeks ago there. An unfortunate situation there into turn one there. Certainly unfortunate for Kyle Larson. And undoubtedly Larson was remembering that in the stretch run to the finish there when he was holding up the one. Although ultimately Joey Logano's looked like a blown engine there on the 22, ultimately caused the race to restart the closing stages, and Truex still able to hold off Chastain for the win. Ryan Blaney still looking for his first win and an even longer winless streak, although he was last year's All-Star race winner at Texas. No wins last season outside of that. Finishing in the third spot, William Byron back to fourth, Denny Hamlin in the fifth spot there. Pretty much all five of those drivers at one point or another seem to have really good cars. Even Denny Hamlin at a point there during stages 1 and 2. Christopher Bell in the sixth spot, Tyler Reddick in seventh, Brad Keselowski eighth, Chris Buescher in ninth, and Josh Berry with another top 10 as the super sub out there, kind of taking Justin Allgaier's place as kind of the one that everybody's calling whenever somebody needs a substitute driver. Still getting another great run out there in the number 48, finishing in the 10th spot. 48, of course, no stranger to success here at Dover. Of course, Jimmy Johnson owning the keys to this place for so long. I know there were a lot of questions about whether or not Jimmy would drive this car, given the fact that, he's made those couple of starts this year with the Legacy Motor Club, but that did not come to pass there. And Josh, your 10th place finisher. Looking at the results here, it looks like Bubba Wallace on top of the flat tire he had towards the end of the race, finishing 13.489 seconds back in the lead. Apparently had some kind of a problem there on the final lap of the race, shown about 6 seconds back of Chase Elliott there in the 11th spot. So not exactly sure what happened there in that situation. But still, regardless, being able to finish on the lead lap, especially in a race like this with such a torrid pace as it had, only 12 cars on the lead lap at the finish of that. Your last place battle in this, Ty Dillon has now taken the lead in the NASCAR Cup Series championship with his series leading now 3 last place finishes on top of the Daytona 500 and the Circuit of the Americas not long ago. This now with the 77 car, unfortunately not being able to continue the momentum of a 14th place finish that Ty had last week at Talladega, where he was even contending for the lead at certain points during that race. unfortunately gets involved in one of the hardest accidents that we saw during this race here on the front straightaway. A very classic kind of Dover incident with the self-cleaning surface definitely playing a factor there. The number 99 of Suarez bounces off the outside wall after running inside the top 10. There's a bit of a checkup there. Kyle Busch just had a pit road speeding penalty, gets in the back of the 77, spins him to the inside. BJ McLeod has to check up and spins out as well. Doesn't suffer very serious damage. Unfortunately, both Suarez and Dillon did. Noah Gragson had been running in last place at the time after he bounced off the backstretch wall. The team was trying to clear the crash clock. Unfortunately, they did not. And soon after the restart there, after Ty Dillon's accident, Gragson was out of the race. And then, as mentioned earlier, Brennan Poole, in his first Cup start since 2020, his first in the next-gen car, ends up having his day cut short with some contact from Ross Chastain, and then spinning him into the outside wall. Larson does not climb out of the bottom 5 by the end of this. After spending about 20 laps in the garage area after clearing the crash clock, he still ends up 41 laps down in the 32nd spot, and about 15 or 16 laps from catching Joey Logano, whose wreck brought out that last caution there after a miserable afternoon for Logano himself there. Several drivers, again, much like a classic Dover race in this sense, the demands on these cars mechanically, as well as demands on the drivers physically, were definitely a factor in this one. These drivers ended up being further back in the order. Logano 25 down, Chase Briscoe 22 down, BJ McLeod 19 laps down, all of them well back in the order. JJ Yaley, the first car less than 10 laps down in the running order, that being in the 28th spot, 7 laps down in the other Rick Ware Racing entry. But again, kudos to Martin Truex Jr. for pulling off the victory there. So good to see what they're able to do. I guess the question really is, as we come into a couple more racetracks that he has a good history at, certainly Kansas, has had some good runs out there. Darlington won a very convincing race there against Kyle Larson just a couple of years ago. And then going into Wilkesboro, and, a track that is going to be kind of a little bit of a curveball here, much like the Clash was earlier this year that Truex pulled out the victory. We could see, again, another good strong run or a strong stretch of runs here for the number 19 team coming up here. But kudos to him. I mean, Truex has certainly, been on the outside looking in for a while. It was frustrating at Daytona last year where both he and Ryan Blaney were involved in incidents. And it came down to really a war of attrition as to who was actually going to make the cut for the playoffs there. Truex ultimately on the outside of that and having to kind of rebuild for this year. But it's good to see, especially after there were, questions about if he was going to come back again this season. Ultimately did lock up the ride to come back this year. And it's certainly good to see. So congratulations to Truex on that victory there, and a tremendous effort for him. Looking at other drivers throughout the pack here, we talked about the top 10 running order here. Chase Elliott, your defending winner of this race, coming back in the 11th spot there. So not still looking to try to get his first win, looking at drivers trying to get and punch their ticket to get into the next round of the playoffs here. But that will still be a battle that the number 9 team will have to look ahead to Kansas and the rest of the season for, in that case. Ty Gibbs looked to have one of the best runs that he's had in his rookie season, was running about the top 5 for most of this event, but unfortunately was 7 laps short on fuel towards the end and lost a lap before he had a chance to refuel, dropping him back to the 13th spot, the first car 1 lap down. Still not a bad run, but certainly not indicative of how good he had performed. Another driver right behind him, Corey LaJoie, was battling for a top 10 during points of this race as well. Continues a streak of top 15s, kind of back to his early season form there, where he was really surprising with a lot of good runs. Great performance out of him, especially given the fact that his teammate really struggled in this race as well. We saw Eric Jones around the 11th or 12th place spot there for much of this race. Ends up back in the 16th spot, a few positions back. Ryan Preece was frustrated when qualifying was canceled. Still gets a 17th place run out of this. Kevin Harvick, really surprised to not see Harvick be as much of a factor here. This seemed to be a race that they must have had circled on their calendar, much like the performance that he had at Phoenix earlier this year to try to make his bid for the championship. But unfortunately, a 19th place finish is the only thing that they had to show for here at this moment. Harrison Burton spun out at the entrance of pit road. It finishes in the 20th spot, showing 2 laps down, the first car 2 laps down. And then further back, everybody else that was struggling. Austin Dillon in his backup car was 5 laps down after starting in the last place spot and climbing back out of that position there. Seemed to have issues with the brakes during the opening run when he was running in last place. But ultimately only gains a few more spots from there. And Austin Cindric continues a perplexing season for him in the number 2 team. Really, I guess you could say it could really spread through a lot of Penske in general. Logano, as mentioned earlier, was just completely out to lunch in this race, much as he had been during the Bristol Dirt race a few races ago. You think about his last place runs that he had, including Bristol and then even the Vegas race. But even in Vegas, he was the pole sitter and running a few good laps during the event there. Just had some bad luck along the way. But here, I mean, it's just been a really unfortunate performance there for the number 22 team. They got some questions they definitely need to answer during this next stretch of races coming up here. I think they just need to kind of get some lead lap finishes, maybe some top 15s to kind of offset that. So we'll see how things shake out on that end there. Got to talk about, we're going to kind of lump the Xfinity and Cup Series discussions together because, of course, that's the story of the weekend. Congratulations again to Ryan Truex. This is a driver who has completed the NASCAR Triple Crown, 2 last place runs in trucks, 1 each in Xfinity and the Cup Series. You think about his time driving for BK Racing, trying to work his way up the ranks there. Has come so close to winning races before, most infamously that one back in 2012 at the Dover track where he lost to Joey Logano. That ultimately dropped him out of contention there. He comes back and still with Joe Gibbs Racing. Really let the emotions flow, even though, again, you think of much like with his brother, you don't really see the emotion that much from that family. But clearly being able to win at his home track, get that good performance out there. Fantastic job by Ryan Truex pulling off that victory, a convincing one. Seemed like it was very much never really in doubt. Much like Martin towards the end of this race here, although Martin with that last restart was a little bit of a wrench thrown into it there, but the 2-tire stop was the right call for him. Fantastic job there by Ryan pulling off the victory there. I think that's, you think about those t-shirts he was selling, the Go Ryan shirts with the hand-drawn cars, and all the different teams he'd swap between, driving for Al Neese, driving for different, again, BK Racing, mentioning them. Massive for him. I mean, this is, another one of those drivers, almost had 200 combined starts between the top 3 series. It had a lot in common with your last place finisher this race, Parker Kligerman, driving the number 48 car there. Again, another driver trying to get opportunities. First full-time effort that Kligerman's had since 2013 when he was driving for Kyle Busch on another Toyota program out there. But this time around, unfortunately, Kligerman, driving for the Dash for Cash, ends up involved in an accident down the back straightaway. Contact from Corey Heim takes him out of the race. Not too happy about that. Certainly understandable there, especially given the fact that I believe he had finished every race on the lead lap this year, which is really something given the diversity of tracks we've already had, even on the Xfinity Series schedule this year. But the first time that a Dash for Cash driver under the current system since 2011 has finished in last place. Big thanks to Seth Eggert for doing some research on that he contributed for this as well. But tremendous effort for Ryan Truex. An unfortunate situation for the number 48 team there. First time that the driver that was classified on the pole position has finished last since Noah Gragson at Kansas in 2020. Very rare to have pole sitters finish last in the Xfinity Series, not just because of all the start and park teams that we had for a period there, but really going all the way back to 1982. Although there are some races that really don't have the starting results preserved. Unfortunately, the Cup Series results are much the same way. But still, I believe this is still only about the 9th occasion that it's happened since the series was reincorporated as what is now the Xfinity Series back in 1982. Looking at the rest of the race results, the bottom 5 there, Jeffrey Earnhardt, Anthony Alfredo, Corey Heim, and CJ McLaughlin, your bottom 5 finishers in that event there. Anthony Alfredo was looking to be your last place finisher in that one, had a spectacular brake failure down the back straightaway on Saturday's race. Looked like some debris was getting, very close to our buddy Dalen Barr there, one of the photographers there at the track, had a pretty close call there. Glad that he's okay there. But Alfredo ended up having to spend some time behind the wall. Looked like they're going to try to get some equipment from Sam Hunt Racing because the McLeod effort apparently didn't have a replacement brake rotor or the equipment to get him back out there. But ultimately did get him back out. Unfortunately, the brake issues still didn't go away, and he ended up pulling behind the wall after Jeffrey Earnhardt's engine failure there. So still ends up in the bottom 5 at the same order there. Looking to some more positive runs here at the same time. Kaz Gralla just outside the top 10 in the other Sam Hunt Racing effort there, finishing in the 12th spot. Then you look back to Brett Moffitt, Ryan Sieg, Parker Retzlaff all inside the top 20. None of them able to really break into the top 10. There are a lot of the usual suspects were behind Ryan Truex there at the finish. So unfortunately, we didn't see as much of the underdogs being able to prevail here at the same time. Although at the same time, we've had a lot of great excitement about throwback paint schemes coming up. Not just for Darlington, but also for North Wilkesboro. Makes me wonder how many of these teams are going to run the same Darlington scheme at Wilkesboro, given that the race is run the very next week. I guess you really have to just look at that from the Cup Series programs there. Since the Truck Series, I guess the Truck Series isn't running at Darlington. It's too bad. That would have been. Well, I guess, or are they running it? Because I thought they're having the 56 team is going to do the Ted Musgrave effort. So I guess that's going to be for the Darlington race. And then they announced for Hill Motorsports they're actually going to finally run Jerry Hill's paint scheme, the orange and yellow car from that, for the race over at North Wilkesboro. So yeah, so there would be a Truck Series race at Darlington and Wilkesboro in consecutive weeks. So hopefully we'll see a lot more throwbacks from there. I know we already heard some announcements on some of the other ones from earlier this year, but there's a lot of carryover from that event too. But exciting to see as well. On the Xfinity side for Darlington, we saw the paint scheme revealed today, a Kevin Harvick throwback for Ryan Ellis's effort there over at Alpha Prime Racing. That one looks good too. I think it's going to be, it's been kind of a later year. It seems like it's been later and later that we've been getting these announcements on these throwback paint schemes, which is unusual, especially this year with the 75th anniversary. You think they'd be more forthcoming on that. But still really good to see. So hopefully we're going to have some good paint schemes here the next couple of weeks. Kansas next week, and then we go into the Darlington, Wilkesboro, and then the 600 stretch after that. Going to be some big events coming up here, and we'll definitely be talking about them on these shows here the next couple of weeks. I want to kind of cover some other notes that I had on my phone here from other stories from this week. But yes, Jake Finch, I definitely got to talk about him. Congratulations to Jake for pulling off a victory there in the ARCA East win at Dover this past weekend there. Tremendous for them with Phoenix Racing. Good to see the Phoenix logos back at Victory Lane, working with the Venturini team this time around here. James, his father, spoke very highly of him in his interview when we did the Field Fillers episode on the 09 and the Mikasuki team a couple of years ago. Talking about their efforts back in 2004. But good to see that that family is still working their way up through the ranks here too. Speaking of paint schemes and Darlington coming up, I want to give a congratulations as well to Eric Estep and the group over there, Black Flags Matter, Danny B, even the Scene Vault podcast being involved in this effort and helping out the Live Fast Motorsports team on the number 78. That's tremendous out there for them. Not strictly a throwback scheme, but hey, I think that's going to be tremendous for anybody out there, producing content here on YouTube and kind of bringing more attention to the programs that they produce out there. So kudos for them. One of these days, we got to get a NASCAR car out there. One of these days, we'll see how things are going to shake out on that going forward. But that'll be a battle for another day there. Certainly hoping Alex Bowman's doing okay after his recovery. Talking a bit about Josh Berry. Being in the ride there for him after the sprint car accident that Bowman had this week. Certainly hope that he has a speedy recovery. And who knows, maybe Fox will actually do a promo for him when he comes back. Him pointing out, of course, all the advertising about Chase Elliott since his return these last couple of weeks. Let's see here. Kind of talking about the other drivers that brought into NASCAR's 75 greatest drivers this week. I believe we're down to about the last 10 or 11 spots open here. I really have been kind of pleased with how NASCAR has revealed these drivers along the way. and giving them an opportunity to really kind of get creative with how they're being presented. Trying to kind of, I mean, you definitely sense that they're trying to create something out of whole cloth that's maybe not as notable as in the NFL when you have that gentleman that comes out that's inviting people into the into the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame. It hasn't quite reached that level yet, but it's nice to see the reactions of people like Dale Earnhardt Jr., Jeff Burton, Sterling Marlin, Bobby Labonte that have all been mentioned in this group. A lot of discussion has been brought up during a lot of these announcements as to whether it's really proper to have a driver be considered still one of the 75 greatest if they stayed in the sport too long. I always kind of bristle at that concept. I would think that longevity should be one of the other things that should be something that should be rewarded, that it should be applauded, that it shouldn't just be the sheer statistics that, okay, yeah, at the end of his career, Bobby Labonte, like Terry Labonte, ran those years for Go Fast Racing or JTG Darty, and they weren't the best statistics. But does it not, count to say, hey, this person still stayed in the sport when the cars were changing that much and was able to stay competitive, was still able to qualify for races? Yes, in some of these cases, these drivers had past champions provisionals and other things to work with, but they still stayed out there and they wanted to continue to develop these programs. In some cases, programs that are still around today. So I don't think that detracts from a driver being one of the 75 greatest at all. Really, a lot of the drivers that have been introduced in this current patch have had that in common. Drivers, you can even say this of Dale Jr.'s career, of staying in the sport for a really lengthy period of time and really trying to kind of have the best runs out there. He's still running the occasional Xfinity race too on top of that. But yeah, I don't think that takes anything away. I mean, could you say that of Darrell Waltrip or of Cale Yarborough, of Richard Petty, drivers that stayed out in the sport well past the time that they were either regular winners or winning at all? I don't think that makes them any less great. And especially since there's not really a firm standard to this too. Steve Letarte was kind of discussing this in the Dale Jr. download there about how it's kind of distinguished from the Hall of Fame as being that, this person it's not just the off-track accomplishments, it is focusing on the on-track. But again, I think that the ability to qualify for these races, the ability to be as competitive as you can be, and still showing that even in spite of, a driver that has gone through, say, a series of injuries, or that's much later in their career, and that there's other drivers that are more competitive than them, that they're still able to stay out there. I think that really adds to it. I don't think that takes anything away. So, I know different drivers have felt that way, felt different about that in their own careers. You had drivers like Ned Jarrett that stepped away from the series at their very peak, that didn't really have that time where they would, kind of fall down in performance a bit. But they're just as great as anybody else, and they're just as much populated on that list. Mike Joy was very right to bring up that maybe some other drivers that were kind of forgotten from even the 50th anniversary group should still be considered. Things haven't really been tracking that direction, which is unfortunate. I guess with any list, you're always gonna have something where people are gonna be left out of it. It would be nice if we had a bit of a mix of drivers that didn't make that initial cut, because we have seen it trend much more towards the recent years, and that's just going to be inevitably what happens. In the last 25 years, you're going to have guys like your Joey Logano's, your Kyle Busch's, your Jimmy Johnson's, that, if they're not on the list already, there's certainly going to be ones that are going to be considered. Drivers that, back in 1998, either were just starting their careers or hadn't even started their careers yet. And that's unfortunate, because you are going to have a situation where maybe other forerunners of the sport that haven't been honored on that list yet just aren't going to get their due. It's been a similar problem with the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and they've tried to kind of compromise that by having this whole thing with the forerunners, or the kind of the founding members versus the more current drivers or competitors in the sport, and then also trying to kind of broaden that beyond just drivers themselves and team owners and others involved in NASCAR in general. It's a similar problem. I really felt that with, again, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, that it would have been best to just say, hey, these guys, I was surprised they didn't work with the NASCAR 50 greatest drivers list at the initial moment when they started the Hall of Fame, and just say, hey, everybody agrees these are the 50 greatest drivers. Let's have them be the founding class. And then we don't have to argue about, should Darrell Waltrip be in there before Cale Yarborough, or should it be Richard Petty before Bill France or whatever else? But I mean, at this point here, there's nothing they can do about that. Just glad that we're having people like Kirk Shelmerdine and everything being considered there too. I think, what was it? Mario Andretti just posted a tweet this past week that had that Mark Twain quote about it's better to be not recognized for talent that you have rather than, being celebrated for talent that you don't. I think that, there's going to be people who say, oh, this person should be in there. As long as their names are out there in one way or another, that's, I think, the important thing. And certainly from a history standpoint, that's another place to look at there too. Also, as to other subjects that have come up kind of this past week, Denny Hamlin had a discussion about this bracket system, and there's been getting a lot of traffic about that this past week, and trying to create this new storyline. It's like, okay, everybody's going to challenge to get in the top 32 in points, and they're going to match this driver against that driver, and I think this person's going to race a lot harder against that guy. I'm kind of surprised, given Hamlin's statement on these kind of gimmick races or just gimmicks in general. I mean, he had a different term for it kind of earlier, that this was something he'd be excited about. It's like, do we really need another layer of some just absurd, do we have to craft a storyline out of whole cloth here? I'm reminded, what it reminded me so much of was back in 2011, there was this thing called the Sprint Summer Showdown. Does anybody even remember this? This happened like 12 years ago, and they did it one time, and it didn't really get any attention. It was almost kind of a similar concept. What they did was they had the race winners of 3 races in the summer, just an abstract time, just like in August, and they're going to have like, okay, the race winners of these 3 races, we're going to match them against each other in the Atlanta race, and whoever wins that race, they can get a bonus. And it's like, oh yeah, they're going to race this race much harder. But nobody ever talks about that one, because that Atlanta race was the one where Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson just put on a battle for the ages, where it's probably the most famous battle that Gordon and Johnson had for a lead. Even more so, I think, than that Martinsville race in 2007 or the 2012 Martinsville race that got screwed up by the David Rudiman caution. That was a really huge moment, and nobody cared about, who were the 3 drivers that were in the Sprint Summer Showdown. I think it was Ambrose after he won Watkins Glen. It was like Keselowski at Bristol, and then somebody else in between too. It was like, it was somebody else in the mix. I don't remember the 3rd driver. But that's how little of an impression that made. And I think if you had like NASCAR trying to adopt some kind of ridiculous bracket thing, that would be kind of the same situation. I don't think it would get that much attention. What needs to happen is you need to have focus on current storylines. Much like in that race in Atlanta in 2011, you didn't have to come up with another storyline. You got Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson going for it. And I think that was the one where like Gordon was going for it was another landmark win for Hendrick. It was like their 100th win or their 50 or his 75th win or something was happening there. There was something with that. But that was enough of a storyline as is, and it just bigfooted this complete artificial storyline thing that they tried to kind of come up with. Well-meaning, I'll say that it's well-meaning, but was it really going to be very interesting? And that's where it needs to come up. And I understand where it's NASCAR's situation here with the broadcast. They're not going to go over the broadcast and say, oh, well, this broadcast sucks. It's not bringing up the storylines. It's not showing the sport in the best light. It's not doing it's not capitalizing on the personalities that we have. Because ultimately, the networks are the ones that are paying billions of dollars for these TV rights. If the broadcast wanted to film their own feet during these races and just show that on TV, there's probably not much that NASCAR could say about it. Now, the networks obviously aren't doing that. I like that they had Rusty Wallace in the booth today. I think he added a lot to the booth's dynamic. I still didn't like how Clint Boyer was poking fun at him about wearing glasses or anything like that. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't want to get overly precious about that. If Rusty didn't care, I don't care. It's the way these broadcasts are being handled. They're going to just do their own thing. And ultimately, especially with the new TV contracts being negotiated and how much money or how much less money is going to be a factor there, that's going to be the thing to look at. But it's undeniable that they have a tremendous ability to shape our experience of watching these races, whether you're a new viewer or whether you're somebody that follows this week to week and you just want to learn what's happening. I've been working on these 500 days episodes, and I'll weave this into a plug on this. Thankfully, with these earlier start times, which is another thing I guess I could branch off on, but the rain delay, the rain postponement yesterday, and then having, everything like that happen, really allowed me to kind of dig into more of these 500 days episodes and watching these broadcasts from 2001 on the same network, from Fox back then, and all the information that you learned from it. There's other research I do trying to pull stuff from articles and websites and just anything else I can get my hands on. But really from the broadcast themselves, and big thanks to a lot of the YouTubers out there that are archiving a lot of this material, because it is tremendously valuable. You can learn so much from those just watching it. It's not just a throwaway line in Days of Thunder when Tom Cruise says, ESPN, the coverage is excellent. You'll be surprised how much you can pick up. You really can be. And you can watch those older broadcasts too. I've hammered on this point plenty of times, and I'm doing it again, but that's a really big point of that there too. I will say on that same subject that is the next project that I'm working on here. Those of you in the Patreon have been getting some more updates on that. The next 2 episodes of 500 Days are the next thing I'm hoping to get done. I'd love to get them done sometime this month. Certainly with the subject matter, since it's going to be discussing episode 5 is going to focus on the Las Vegas weekend for the Cup Series, and episode 6 absolutely has to be up as soon as possible after that, because that one's going to cover the famous Atlanta weekend in the spring of 2001. And given what's happening in North Wilkesboro here in a couple weeks with Kevin Harvick running that white and red paint scheme that we talked about before, that people, we've been 10 years past Harvick even run the 29 car, and much longer since he ran that white and red paint scheme. There's people who haven't even seen that car on the track at all and only know Harvick is the guy in the 4 car these days. That is no doubt going to be tremendous. And I'd love to be able to get these videos out to provide that extra context on top of the story that we already do know, and to kind of get that going. So that's been a big project here too. Another thing that's coming up is I'm pleased to say that I had an article with Norm Benning as well as Tim Veens to provide extra context as to what happened at Daytona earlier this year when Norm Benning didn't qualify for that race after he had that great practice run out there. That will not be in a video. That will be an article on the NASCAR.info site, tentatively planned to be posted this Wednesday. So I'll have the story for you guys on that. Norm and I have been working on that. And again, big thanks to Norm, for providing his interviews, and as well to Tim Veens on that at the same time. Want to get kind of both sides of about what was happening back then, because that was going to be such a huge storyline from that weekend. And it's clear that both of them wanted something to happen there. But unfortunately, things didn't work out. So hopefully this will kind of demystify a bit of that story. So there is a lot more content coming up. And I've been kind of kicking around ideas for other videos that are going to be coming up after that. Certainly I have Trevor Boy's video. I haven't forgotten about that. I got that script I need to polish up. Field fillers is still going to be in the works. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to be kicking around. And then in between all of this, of course, is going to be our trackside coverage at Sears Point, which is now just over a month from now, coming up in June. That'll be the next trackside coverage that we'll have there. So I started getting a lot of questions on some of that. I definitely want to kind of address that on the show. Certainly, if anybody's catching up on this, either watching this live now or watching this a bit later in the day. So let's see here. I also want to give some congratulations to another couple people out here. Seth Sharp as well as Kobe Lambeth both picked up some work with NASCAR here. Apparently, Kobe has been doing some freelance work with NASCAR, and then brought Seth on board there. Kudos to the both of them. I've met Seth at the track at Darlington a few years ago, and I've interviewed. I've been on the podcast with Kobe as well as Ben Schneider, one of our staff writers there before. They're both great individuals. I know they're going to be tremendous assets with NASCAR. So kudos to the both of them for landing those gigs there. I'm very excited about what they'll be producing here coming up here at the same time. So it's really good to see. I mean, we're getting a lot more exposure to a lot of more content here. People working on board. We're going to have some big things coming up this year as well. We got, between our trackside coverage at Sears Point, We got Ben Schneider coming down for that, as he did last year. He did a great job out there covering the West Series. Also been working on getting William back out to Road America this summer, and doing having some trackside coverage there for the Midwest here. I know he's been doing more of the IndyCar coverage, so having him kind of cover the open wheel thing. We'll see how things are going with the Xfinity Series later this year. That's still up in the air for that, but that'll be another story for a bit further down the line. Yeah, just kind of piecing things together. So, but luckily that was the plan coming in here this year, trying to really kind of produce more on the videos and get the Derek Cope book out too. Still working on the cover illustration to kind of get that tied together. The editor has a manuscript pretty much ready to go. Once things start looking good there, and I kind of get advanced copies out to people for reviews, and we start getting some reviews in there, we'll be able to kind of set a release date and get that going there too. The audiobook is something I still need to tie up. I have that recorded. I just need to get the outtakes clipped out and get that going. So I've had no shortage of stuff to work on here this year, folks, and I hope you guys are going to be enjoying seeing that coming up here as well. Beast of Metal, thank you for my for the super chat there as well. Let me jump into that as well. Just dropping by to quickly question why NASCAR insists on holding this race in May when June is a much drier month in the Mid-Atlantic. I'll watch the replay after I watch the race. See you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you again for the super chat. Yeah, I think the weather is certainly a big story from this weekend. If memory serves, it seems like this has been a recurring issue, certainly for this event. Hopefully they can figure out, what would be a better rhythm for this event here. Because I was very pleased that NASCAR called this race as early as they did yesterday, that they didn't just string us along and have everybody watch that. Really, I know some people love rain delay coverage. I think it's really boring. Even when I'm like trackside and stuff, I mean, it's like, you do have a good opportunity to interview drivers, and that's cool. I mean, we did that at Darlington and even Fontana this year with the snow. But other times you're going to be just hanging out in the camper lot, and, media can't get back there. So you're going to have issues with that. But I think it was good that they called it as quick as they did. I think that had a role in how many people came back today. So people had a chance to either change their flights, their hotel reservations. And I like that they had a realistic goal about what could and couldn't be dried during that day. Even with a concrete track that generally seems to dry quicker, and you got the banking to work with and a smaller track. I'm glad they did that, because I thought they had a great turnout today. There were posts before this race today that they had about 10,000 people that were outside the stands still working their way into the track when the engines were fired. Try to get people in there as quick as you can, but it's still fantastic that this many people stayed out and still got to see a great race and a great weekend there for the Truex family. So those who were there at the track definitely got their money's worth, and that was good to see. So kudos to them on that as well. And I got to definitely cycle back to this. The earlier start times, absolutely fantastic. I think this weekend should be something that the networks and NASCAR should really look at going forward. Take this from somebody here on the West Coast. I have zero problem with getting up and watching a race at what would be 9 a.m. our time today, or it would have been 10 a.m. at the original slot, and having a race over at lunchtime, and then you have the rest of your afternoon, whether it's doing this show here or producing other content. That's great. I think, you could look at it. I mean, it's way better than having it start at lunchtime on the West Coast here and having it end in the afternoon, and then your day is pretty much just shot. I think, especially in a series where you're having so many races a season and so few off weekends, if you could just get those earlier start times, I think it would be great, certainly for the East Coast, which is much more your traditional viewer of it and still gets the highest ratings, in one region or another. And then you still have the West Coast here. I mean, people will still watch it. I guess I can't speak for everybody out here, but I have fond memories of back in the old ESPN days. I always knew 9:30 was about the time you got to get up, because you can watch the end of, NASCAR today leading into the Cup race. And the Cup race would start probably about 9:45, 10 a.m. And then, it would be over 12:30, 1 o'clock. And that was really the great way to do it. I know that there's different things that these networks are experimenting with. I know they've looked at things like, running races on Mother's Day and Easter, and we hear a lot of, platitudes about why they're doing that and thinking that it's going to produce better ratings. But I think that, again, these early start times is something that needs to be really looked at. I think it's certainly a positive reviewing experience. I guess the real challenge is you got to look at is like how people are able to get to the track. As long as they're able to do that, I think all bets are off at that point. And fewer night races too. I guess we got Kansas next week. That's not a night race. So that's good. It's nice that they're spacing this out a little bit more. But that would be another thing to kind of look at there at the same time. Let's see here. But yes, thank you for the super chat, Beast of Metal, and definitely a very good point to bring up here at the same time. But what about Willie B? But what about the valuable thing with the bouncy house? I don't know. I was getting flashbacks. What was that movie where was it? It wasn't Step Brothers. It was the other. It was the Old School. The one where Will Ferrell gets the dart in the neck, and then he like pushes that kid out of the way before he falls in the pool. I remember just laughing myself to tears during that. And he just had this thing with Pockrass in the bounce house and he's knocking these kids over. And it's just like, I mean, okay, I hope the kids are okay. I don't want anything serious, but I can't help but, crack up from some of that. Pockrass, I think one thing I do have to say about that is, yeah, I mean, and Pockrass is a cool guy, and he absolutely the hardest working guy in the garage area. The concern I have is that, the network is starting to kind of treat him like the Rutledge Wood in the group there. They're like, oh, here's the guy that does the goofy stuff. I think that would be selling Pockrass pretty short there, because the man works his absolute tail off. I think a lot of the information we get from the green flag start times to questions about rules to even if the track has lights, of course, as Gluck said, I mean, at one point too, where it looked like we weren't going to have Pockrass out there because, they had the situation with what was it? He was with ESPN and then Fox picked him up there, but there was a gap there where, he didn't have, that much of a, presence or being able to, keep serving the role that he's had. I'm glad that Fox has seen value in that. I just hope they continue to do that, because I think that, I mean, I'm sure he's having fun with this and everything like that. And that's cool. I'm happy for him on that. I just hope it's his decision, that they're not kind of forcing him to do this kind of goofy stuff, thinking they need to, because they don't. Have Clint do the goofy stuff. He can do that. Don't make Pockrass do that. I think that's just kind of crazy. But that, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But maybe it plays funnier there. But I don't get it. But that's that. It is what it is. So I guess that's another thing to kind of look at there too. Yes, the 85th win. Okay, some dude 77. Thank you. That was the Jeff Gordon one from Atlanta, right? In 2011 when he has 85th win. That makes sense. So yeah, it was. I remembered it was some kind of mark that they reached. So that was a big story on that one there too. I didn't watch the IndyCar race this weekend, but I hope the ratings were good on that too. Basically, I spent all that afternoon just working on 500 Days. I got the recordings edited. I got the outtakes taken out, and I was starting to drop the clips in there. I'll have basically an estimate. I mentioned this to the Patreon already, so I'll go ahead and mention it on stream. So far, the recordings for both those episodes are 44 minutes each. So once we actually get the clips dropped into them and everything else, they're probably going to be about an hour episodes for each one. As to release dates, again, I don't have any idea on that. I have a goal I'm shooting for. And I want to make sure the Patreon has enough chance to see both episodes if possible, like I did with the Daytona episodes back over the off season. That'll be based on when these episodes are completed. But I'm very excited to get them out there because I think these are, I mean, certainly, those of you who knew what happened in those races, that these were two very significant ones, especially the Atlanta one. So I think that's going to be a big deal on that one too. So we'll see how things kind of end up at that point too. But yeah, I got to say overall, enjoyed the race this weekend. I think it's going to be a good lead in to Kansas, and I think what should be a very exciting month of May. Certainly, we got the Indy 500 coming up later this month in the open wheel ranks, separate from NASCAR, of course, and just seeing what's going to be happening out there. And we got Wilkesboro, we got Darlington, we got throwbacks coming up. And I think Kansas itself shouldn't be sold short in that one too. We saw the 45 team for 23-11 win both races last year with Kurt Busch and Bubba Wallace. Who's to say they can't come back out there and be just as strong? Kurt Busch is going to be back in the booth there as he was when Tyler Reddick won COTA in his car. Undoubtedly, that's going to be emotional there as well. So yeah, I wouldn't overlook that weekend too. And Kansas it's a snake in the grass. It's a track that puts on better racing than I think most people give it credit for. It's one that we've had on our calendar. Actually, we were trying to make that race work this year to cover for this year because I think it would be an interesting venue to do. Ultimately, we're probably going to look to ahead to road trips more for into 2024. I'm very anxious as to how similar the schedule is from this year to next year, because there's one, I'm not ready to kind of really discuss it here yet, but there's one that we were looking at that I think would be a lot of fun to do and would involve a bit of an adventure here, kind of closer to what we did on the East Coast in 2019. I'd like to do something like that where we can knock out a few races at once, and I think that would be really cool. So that's kind of what we're looking ahead to. And big thanks to those of you not only supporting this YouTube channel, but also the Patreon, because that's where we're able to do that. It pays for our writers, our staff writers there, both William Saki and Ben Schneider. It pays for licensing fees for the videos here, and it also pays for doing these trackside coverages as well. Makes that certainly reasonable there too. So big thanks to you guys for your support on that as well. If you're interested in joining any level on that, patreon.com/LastCar on Brock. Also, it is May 1st, so I can say this too. If you're an existing member of the Patreon that has provided your mailing address and you have not received your postcard with the piece of BJ McLeod's wrap from his car, definitely drop me a message on the Patreon that way there. So I know that I need to send out another one there and make sure you get that. And if you join as a new member of the Patreon of any level, $1, $5, or $10 level, you'll also get one of those cards as well while the supplies last. I do have a few extra ones of those as well. And that's separate and apart from the ones I'm selling on eBay. So, of course, if you're just interested in the card themselves, you don't want to do the Patreon, that's cool. I have those on eBay as well. But notice for those in the Patreon, you get 2 pieces of the wrap on the card, whereas the ones on eBay are 1 piece there. So that's the other difference on that. But all of them from the wrap, from the 78 car, from Fontana back earlier this year. So if you're interested in that, those are still definitely available here at the same time. Michael Kelly Gilliam, thank you so much for your super chat as well. I think Kansas is the best 1.5 mile track. I'd have to agree. I think they put on a really good show. I like Vegas a lot. We've covered that these last couple of years. I've really enjoyed covering races there. I think certainly you don't have to worry about finding hotels down there with it being, where it is. And I love the accommodations out there, but I've only heard positive things about Kansas, and we really have had that one kind of circled on our calendar to cover one of these days. I don't know if we're going to get around to the playoff race this fall. Maybe we'll do that instead of Vegas. That's very much up in the air. The only ones we've locked in this year have been Sears Point and then Phoenix for the championship in November. So we'll see how things look beyond that. But I think that would be a lot of fun to really cover. But I think that would be really interesting, too, at the same time. We'll do some trivia questions to wrap up. We'll do kind of a shorter show here today with it being kind of midday. I do appreciate you guys tuning in. I didn't think we get 46 people in here on a Monday, but thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We'll go ahead and wrap up with some questions. We'll bring up the old NASCAR trivia machine here. And once again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Go ahead and definitely mention in the chat which category you'd like there, and we'll do some questions there to wrap up for today. Do we have a call on technical inspection yet? Probably not, but we'll see if we have anything on that. I'm seeing the discussion here about when was the last time brothers swept the weekend in the same car number and the same manufacturer. I don't think that's happened. Again, I'm not sure. Seth Egert's really good with asking these questions here online, and I don't always have the answers to them readily. I keep a lot of my statistics on here, but usually like bottom 5 finishers or, when it happened in context of the Xfinity race or the truck race, it's a little harder for me to come by on that. But that's still, it's still interesting. I try to dig for the stats there where I could find them, and that'll be another one. Let's see. Looks like we do not have a call on inspection yet. But we do have the entry lists for the Cup and Xfinity, or no, excuse me, the Cup and Truck races this weekend at Kansas. So let's take a look at that. We'll go ahead and jump into this here while we get our candidates here for trivia. Looking at here, Brennan Poole again entered in the number 15 for Rick Ware Racing, so good to see him get some more runs. And then Josh Berry still in the 48, of course, relieving for Alex Bowman there. Let's see if we have any other drivers or teams that are standing out. I don't see. It looks like just the 36 chartered entries again on the Cup Series side. So we'll start working on our Thursday feature on the entry list storylines for this week. Looks like the stories are going to be kind of thin on the ground there, at least for the Cup Series side. Looks like Harvick's going to be running the For the Farmers paint scheme again on the number 4. So that'll be another one to look ahead to there. Let's see. McDonald's scheme for Tyler Reddick there on the 45. The Kraft Macaroni and Cheese paint scheme coming back for Ricky Stenhouse, so some good ones there. Josh Bilicki in the 78. Good to see him back out there again. Actually have my Bilicki shirt on underneath this deal here with his paint scheme there, the number 52 there for the Rick Ware Racing effort. So we got that brought out here at the same time. Let's look at the Truck Series interest. We got Tony Bredinger making her Truck Series debut. The Victoria's Secret entry, so that'll be something to see here on that. Johnny Sauter making the move over to Roper Racing in the 04, the CarQuest entry. So that'll be interesting. Brennan Poole doing double duty. He's going to run for G2G in the 46. Poole actually has a bit of a history with Tim Veens there, so that'll be another part of the Norm Benning article coming out this week, so you'll have some more details on that. Unfortunately, Kyle Busch and Ross Chastain are listed on the Truck Series entry list there. So that'll probably be first and second unless anything really freaky happens throughout the field. Tim Veens himself is being entered in the second G2G truck there, the number 47. This will be 36 trucks on the list for 36 spots, so that should actually lock both of them in. So kudos to them. Nick Lights is back on the number 20 truck for Young's Motorsports there. We saw him make a run, I believe, at Richmond last year. Let's see. What we got here? Dean Thompson, and we got the same entry through there. Jake Garcia is still there. Mason Maggio still in the 33. Raja Karuth still in the 24. Josh Rialm in the 22 for AM Racing. Who's in the second? I don't think I see the second Rialm truck there. I only see the 33 and the 35. I don't see the 34 at the bottom of the list there. Hair Club, the sponsorship for Tyler Hill, the number 56. Justin S. Carroll. Oh, goodness. We might actually get Carroll into his first Truck Series start. That would be huge with 36 entries on here. I don't think we're going to, unless you had any new entries out there. But 36 for 36 spots, that should finally put the 90 truck in there. I think they have like 60 NQs since last year for Justin S. Carroll. So that would be great if they can get a good run out there. Kansas is going to be a tricky track for somebody to make their first start, certainly if there's any mechanical issues or anything, but hopefully they can capitalize on a good run in practice and go from there. So yeah, some good stories this weekend. Those will be among the ones that we'll be following here, the entry list storylines here at the same time. So we'll jump into that at the same time. You may go to Richmond in July, Sir Wrinklestein. Excellent. If you do, definitely get some, if you're able to get some last place pictures, you know where to reach me on that one as well. Let's see. I only see a couple votes for tracks in the wild card. Let's see. I'll just break the tie here, and we'll just do some wild card questions here to wrap up for the evening. Let's see here. First question here, folks. What type of racing did Richard Petty devote most of the year 1965 to? Let me read that question again. What type of racing did Richard Petty devote most of the year 1965 to? That is our first question. Again, what type of racing did Richard Petty devote most of the year 1965 to? I saw the comment here as well on the Bob Pockris thing. Yeah, some dude 77 is a good point. Yeah, Bob's been around since forever. Maybe he just wants to have a little more fun now. I could see that. I could definitely see that. So yeah, that's cool. I hope that's what it is. I hope they're not just telling him. I hope they're not just giving him the biggie bag at the Wendy's thing and say, "Hey, get in it, Bob." Like, I hope it's not that. That's the only thing. That's the only way I would have a problem with it. But if it isn't, then okay, great. So that I got no problem. So that would be kind of be the way I'm looking at it. What type of racing did Richard Petty devote most of the year 1965 to? Is our first question for today. Should have had Phil Parsons in the booth, Sir Wrinkleson. Yeah, that would have been cool. Especially on the anniversary of Parsons' his only Cup win at Talladega in 1988. Kudos to him. We talked about, I showed the Parsons diecast a while back. Had to pull the trigger on that one for sure. But that was a big one there. What type of racing did Richard Petty devote most of the year 1965 to? A lot of you got the answer. It is indeed drag racing. Drag racing. Same series that, very different back then, of course, but Tony Stewart, of course, having success in drag racing now. Next question, who did Dale Earnhardt beat by 19 points to win his first championship? Who did Dale Earnhardt beat by 19 points to win his first championship? That is our next question. I hope the audio has been a lot better. It sounded better in testing. I really had to spend a lot of Saturday fixing that issue too. Basically what we had was we had multiple tracks on here and we were getting some interference. And I had to uninstall the microphone and then plug it back in to kind of get it back on there. And what was great is once I fixed that, I could hear again. I could hear the intro and the animations and stuff on this, where I couldn't hear it at all for a couple months. So this has been a problem for a while. So I'm glad that worked out there, knockwood. Hopefully we're good on Gremlins here for a little bit, because I like this computer. I want to keep this thing as long as I can, because I put an extra hard drive on this bad boy, and I want to make sure I want to get a good 5 years out of this thing if I can. I think we're up to 3 at this point, but that'll be good. Audio sounds great. Okay, great. The other thing I was going to look at is an arm for this, so I can bring this much closer. I know everybody has this show where they use this exact same mic and they're eating the thing with it right in front of them. But I don't know if we're gonna do that so much. So we'll see how that goes. Who did Dale Earnhardt beat by 19 points to win his first championship is the question. We got guesses for Cale Yarborough, Richard Petty, Darrell Waltrip. Alrighty, here we go. And who did Dale Earnhardt beat by 19 points? The answer is indeed Cale Yarborough. Yarborough is the answer to the question for today. We'll do one more question here. We're just going to wrap up here for today, and we'll do that. Okay, that's actually a good question. We'll wrap up with this one here, folks. Who was the first NASCAR Winston Cup driver to fly in an F-16 fighter plane? Who was the first NASCAR Winston Cup driver to fly in an F-16 fighter plane? That is our next question here, folks. The last one here for today. While you guys get your guesses in, I'm going to jump over to this as well. Okay. All right. Got to check that in a minute as well. Let me close that. Do I have anything on? We'll check the Pocris page again. That's another thing too. The tech inspection thing. I always check Pocris's one first. So that's been kind of the other thing too. Don't see anything new on that. So that'll probably be it. So again, reading the question one more time here, folks. Who was the first NASCAR Winston Cup driver to fly in an F-16 fighter plane? We got guesses for Kyle Petty and Bill Elliott. Yeah, Willie B. Was it the incident that Bill Elliott was in? Yeah, I mean, possibly. I don't know. Let's see. The answer is Rusty Wallace. Perfect timing. Rusty Wallace after being in the booth today. Rusty Wallace. Charles Peterson Jr., you got that one. Excellent. Rusty Wallace, the first NASCAR driver to fly, Winston Cup driver specifically, to fly in an F-16 fighter plane. So that will do it for our show this week, folks. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Congratulations to the Truex family, Ryan Truex and unofficially Martin Truex Jr., your winners from these races today. Our at LASCAR on Brock is my Twitter feed. Patreon.com/LASCAR on Brock is my Patreon. Of course, this YouTube channel, you can check out more videos on this channel. Our next show is going to be next Sunday after the Cup Series race at Kansas. We'll talk about the action for both the Cup Series race as well as the Truck Series race. We will do a preview of the upcoming throwback weekend at Darlington. We'll talk about the anything else that comes up during the week and find out what's going on. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great week. Stay safe out there, and we will see you guys next time.